Hello. Chapter 3 of Singularity. Um, right, I got a webcam. You can now watch this in 1080p if you want to see every stray hair or read my books on my bookshelf. You can do that now. Um, Anything else I need to say? I don't think so. Here we go. In the rotted heart of the city of angels, a paparazzo awoke. He slid the door of his van back on its rail just far enough to dump out the silted remains of last night's last cup of joe, and closed it again before the morning light could gain a foothold within. Again hidden, Ron Galella Jr. pulled his computer into his lap and picked up where he'd left off the night before, sorting through yesterday's pictures in their hundreds. It had been a slow day for Cindy West, the diva he specialized in covering. She'd gone out shopping in 2 outfits that the fashion magazines would pay a little for, and spent the rest of the day having coffee, lunch, and dinner with her various friends, none of them very interesting. Life as a celebrity photographer was mostly composed of days like this, where nothing exciting happened, not even anything he could pretend was engaging. Pen. Even the exciting days were sometimes boring for Ron. A few weeks ago he'd scored an upskirt shot of Cindy as she left her limo at Club Fuzz. It was a golden photo. Her head was slightly turned to her best angle, and her hand preceded her out the door, holding up the sign of the horns that was so trendy among the faux rockers of LA these days. She had her tongue out like Gene Simmons, but ended up looking younger than the reference would suggest, like a toddler who swore without knowing what the words meant. Innocent, corruptible, and slightly out of her depth. Then, in the midst of all these symbols was the Mac Daddy, the pixelated slip of snatch that screamed to the world her supposedly secret slutdom. Yet the day Ron got that shot had only been slightly more interesting than any other. He'd been pumped for the huge payday he knew he'd get, but the shot itself was nothing special. He was pretty sure she'd set the whole thing up intentionally. It was a little too perfect an encapsulation of the rebranding she was trying to do at the time as she transitioned from pop singer and teeny bopper soap star to soft-hearted rebel rocker whore. It was a rallying cry to her aging demographic. Come with me. You know me from Saturday mornings and TV, Saturday morning TV and cereal boxes, but we're all grown up now, and I get it. You don't want the wholesome lessons anymore, but I'm a changed girl. Ronnie understood the necessity of moments like that and his place in the great PR machine which ground this city forward, but it wasn't why he did the job. He looked at one of the Polaroid prints stuck to the wall of the van to remind himself. Venice, 2009. Cindy had left with no notice, and as far as he knew, he'd been the only American photographer who'd followed her there. She met up with an old ex, Zachary Eberman, whose tabloid name was Zachy, and they hadn't left their hotel room for 3 days. Ron had been posted up on the alleyway entrance the whole time. While he knew what their shut-in meant, and it was juicy enough, pictures of them going into a hotel together just wouldn't sell like he needed them to make the trip worthwhile. Then, on what turned out to be the last day, they emerged from their love den and went out to dinner at an expensive restaurant in their trendiest studs. This was the stuff Ron needed. The two exes leaning forward over the table at each other, sipping wine they weren't even old enough for in the States and smiling affection at at each other like actors on stage. Yet the best was yet to come. When they called for the check, Galella booked it back to his alleyway hideaway and waited. Sure enough, they came hand in hand, with the evening sun at their backs casting shadows like caricatured chaperones before them. As they reached the hotel door, they stopped, turning to each other and unknowingly profiling themselves for Ron. Some balcony or rooftop blocked the last rays of the sunset, so their feet steeped in a pool of shadow. Zachy tilted his head, clearly and coyly inviting her up again, but instead she took his hands, a calm, silent sorrow falling from her like mist, and rose on her toes to kiss him as one might kiss a mother at last visitation, fearfully, selfishly, and with finality. Then she pulled away, turning after a moment and walked into the encompassing dark. Ron's last shot was of Zaki with his hand vainly outstretched, staring into the sun and surely blinded. That was what it was all about for Ron Galella Jr. He wanted to find the genuine lives of the stars in all their chaos and beauty, position himself carefully, and pin them to film like struggling butterflies. He wanted to show people the real deal, the true scoop, the good shit. They thought that celebrities inhabited some other realm. There it was, right in the name. Stars, they called them. Ron wanted to make the stars more human to the people who saw his photos, not by snapping crotch shots, but by finding real humanity, real life in their acted-out existences. Not for the first time, Galella regretted the irony of his role in creating the visual gossip column flood that subverted this lofty goal. And not for the first time he thought of what his father would say. If you didn't do it, somebody else would. So do it, and do it better than they ever could. Ron Galella Sr. had been the greatest paparazzo on earth in his day. He had been responsible for some of the most stirring pieces of celebrity photojournalism ever created. Jackie Kennedy, Elvis Presley, Cher, and Paul Newman had all been splayed open like vivisected specimens under his lens. Junior had fond memories of sitting in the darkroom, bathed in otherworldly rose light, watching his father come alive with the thrills of creation and destruction amidst the swirling chemical fumes. Of all the famous pieces to crawl from that room, it was his father's Andy Warhol collection that Ron liked best. Warhol had admitted Senior into a private, slanted, secret little world of begrimed sex and stardom. Warhol's studio, called The Factory, was home to his little cachet of superstars. He put them in his movies and in his art, fashioning them into constructions of fame. Like all his subjects, he forced them through a grind of unending iteration, copying the copies of their artificial selves until they collapsed into their own image. They ceased to be who they were and became the industrial inputs in his machine. He flash-froze them and chiseled away, possessed by his capricious compulsion to produce, until they were fit to be strung up on the noose of his arm, to be melted in his spotlight, to be seen and seen and seen and seen. Sink or swim, my little monsters, your 15 minutes are ticking away. Some of them drank deeply of the stardom and became great thinkers, actresses, directors, or otherwise creative minds, but most wilted when Warhol's shining light tilted elsewhere. They did lines and smoked pot, there puffing the bellows of the factory's mass production of silk screens and avant-garde film. They were borne down by the weight of pretension, but eagerly gave themselves over to the suppressive spotlight day after day after day. They forgot what it was to merely be. Without an audience they ceased, and so they stayed. Ron had never told anyone, of course, of the unpublished photos his father took there. Of the hulking man carrying a limp feminine form from the midnight service elevator, of the unmarked grave of an unappreciated overdose, of the unmarked grave for an of the unmarked grave for an underappreciated, overdosed cultural martyr in the cemetery on Rikers Island, nor of the name of the place, Golgotha. These were truths his father said were too terrible to tell. Senior always said he took pictures of the stars to keep them in the sky, like a stellar atlas. He didn't want to tear them down to earth. People need their heroes, Junior, he was fond of saying. What would Dad think about what I'm doing today? Ron mused. Would he still think the curtain is worth holding up? The tabloids seem to work at cross purposes now. In part, they try to tear down the pretense that celebs are special, to catch stars in accidentally and unflatteringly human moments. Yet they paid people like Ron to follow them, and by their very attention kept the star a star. It's as though we want to hold them up on the heavenly stage with one hand, while flinging cosmic tomatoes at them with the other. What would Senior think of the whole mess? His phone buzzed from the pocket of his discarded jeans, and after a moment's excavation he looked at the screen. Damn, she was early. He pulled the dirty pants and a shirt on, and threw open the back doors of the van, grabbing his camera bag and running around to the cab in the head-splitting morning light. Time to go to work. I could not get through this without tea. Alright. He beat her to the doctor's office and was parked in the ground floor garage when she arrived in her pink Beamer. He waited until she was in the staircase before leaving the van to follow her. When he reached the third floor, he took out his camera, got it turned on and set correctly, then put it back in the bag, trading it for a small sandwich. He forced himself to take 2 big bites and then settled in to wait. A sandwich was a perfect excuse to be in odd places at odd times. Ron had often waved off security guards wordlessly, as though his mouth were full. When people came up or down the stairs, Ron raised the sandwich in a friendly but uninviting greeting. After about 30 minutes, his phone buzzed again. Ron read the text. It said Exam Room 4. He dropped his edible ploy and grabbed his camera bag to sling it over his shoulder. He held the camera in front of him like a SWAT team breacher and flung the stairwell door open. His eyes spun as he sought and found the right door. A receptionist rose from her desk to stop him, but he had the door in his sights and was loping forward. He pushed it open with his shoulder so that it crashed back against the wall, and there she was. Cindy West lay on the exam room table topless, but in full makeup and freshly styled hair. Above her stood a befuddled doctor with a black Sharpie marker in his hand. He had just finished drawing dotted lines around her breasts, slightly larger than her already considerable dimensions. He threw out a hand to stop him, but Galella was focused and shooting. Cindy sat up quickly, using her arms to push herself up, which had the effect of pulling her breasts taut, making them look firmer and larger. She had tensed and pulled in her stomach as well, so that for a moment she looked like a Maxim model, but with an outraged face. That was it. That was the perfect shot. C-Dub shopping for boob job, the headline would scream. Even the major news networks would run the image, though they would blur it out for the children's sake. It would ensure that for the rest of her career, Cindy West's breasts would be a topic of discussion. She would become the new poster child for augmentation. As he was ejected by a gruff security guard, Ron imagined the distribution his photo would get. From his van, he'd send a watermarked teaser to all his contacts, and a bidding war would ensue for first print rights. The winner would sell the image selfishly for 24 hours. The next day, he'd sell it to everybody else. It would be plastered all over the internet, shown on TV, in every gossip column and women's magazine. There would be debates about boob jobs and expectations and role models. Every American would see a little more of Cindy West as they ran the gauntlet of the supermarket checkout lane. It would, of course, be a flash in the pan, but like all paparazzi photos, but what a flash it would be. As his mobile studio thudded into gear on its way to his real lunch, he replied to the text he'd gotten in the stairwell. They look great, C-Dub. We totally nailed it. Hope you enjoyed it. From now on, videos will be in 1080p, and I guess rate, comment, and subscribe is what they say, right? Rate, comment, and subscribe.